walking around the streets of Philadelphia back in July. We were at the Democratic National Convention, and we're walking around and we're seeing all kinds of paraphernalia and all kinds of buttons and T-shirts and all kinds of stuff for Bernie Sanders. And we're looking around and we're want to have conversation with folks from the Hillary Clinton group and have good discussion and we're walking around and we couldn't find it. Well, we found one person, and we're talking about Philadelphia. This is a city of literally a couple million people, I guess, live in Philadelphia, and a lot of them are downtown on that day. The streets are filled, and where were the Clinton paraphernalia, Henry?
There was no brotherly love for Hillary? Is that what you're saying?
I'm just stating the fact that we didn't see anybody except maybe one or two out of literally thousands, literally hundreds of people that must have been there walking around enjoying Philadelphia and being there. And nobody had buttons on.
Were they on the other side of the wall? Now, to be clear, for full disclosure, I was not in Philadelphia for the convention. Not in the walking human form. I was there in paper form.
Yeah, we were going back and forth and having conversations with you during the whole weekend.
Very much so.
And handing out, if you don't mind handing me one of those. Good morning. Not that version, not that particular issue, but
no, that was the one with Bernie on the cover. You guys were handing those out. So we were there.
These are the ones we were handing out?
We were there in paper form.
Oh, yeah, July 24th, 2016 episode or version of Good Morning.
But the thing that, of course, because this is, to me, from being from afar, I think of how the Democrats built a wall around the convention center. They beat Trump to building a wall. They built a wall to keep the Bernie supporters out, and Trump has yet to build a wall. We'll see if he matches them. His would have more square footage.
Well, let's be honest. I mean, Trump's already backed off on pretty much everything he said he was going to do, all this hoopla. We're already gotten to the point where prosecute Clinton? Yeah, I don't think so. Obamacare, hey! There's some good things in here. Well, there's the keeping kids on their parents' policies so they're 26, and people not being able to be turned down for pre-existing conditions, either their own or their family pre-existing conditions, and that's the whole policy. That's the whole thing. That's the whole bill. That's the whole law. Oh, and the wall. Said they could be a fence in places. Give them time. Give them time because it'll be maybe a picket fence with a couple of little swinging hinged gates. That'll work. That's enough. That's enough.
So what did you find in Philadelphia? Did you find riots?
Let me explain the geography a little bit.
Go ahead.
The setup, okay?
Yeah. Henry's going for the serious take on it.
Yeah. So if you go and use City Hall as the center.
Yep.
Okay. On Sunday when we got there Sunday morning, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. So on Sunday morning when we got there, City Hall was more or less the gathering place, and right next to it was a church where we were actually trained as Bernie peacekeepers, mm-hmm. and it was professional people who knew how to resolve conflict, and they trained us about some of these things.
Yeah.
But if you use City Hall as the center, in one direction you had the Wells Fargo Convention Center where the actual convention happened, and I don't remember if the distance was like 2 miles or 5 miles away.
It was a couple miles away for certain.
Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't walking distance.
And that's where most of the Democrats were sitting. Mm-hmm. On the other side, totally opposite, was where at noon, starting from City Hall, we had the climate change march, and there were tons of people. The estimate was 10,000, but I don't know who made that estimate, so I really don't have an accurate estimate. But there was a very long rally that went all the way from City Hall to the Liberty Bell, mm-hmm. okay? And it was at least 10 blocks, I think, okay?
And it was packed.
So City Hall was used as a staging area, and then we marched. And we got done probably around 3 o'clock or so. And then it was so hot, so we actually made our own air conditioning, if you remember.
It was hot. It was July in the middle of a city in July.
But during that time, we did not see any Hillary supporters in that area. Okay, It was all Bernie people, all very friendly people. Some of the kindest people I've met in a long time were there. I mean, it's thousands. Imagine walking into, as soon as somebody said Bernie, it's we were friends, and that was the amazing part.
Refresh us about, we went in for this training, and of course that was training so that those of us that were peacekeepers were there so that if Trump supporters were in town and tried to disrupt, or if
Hillary
people were there and tried to disrupt or cause a ruckus to make us look bad. Tell us about this training. It was pretty interesting.
Well, there were two parts to it. As soon as we arrived, we were greeted by a policeman. Again, I think it was near City Hall, but across the street. Mm-hmm. And he explained, as long as we behaved and, did reasonable things, mm-hmm. there were not going to be any issues, at least from the police point of view.
They were very good. I thought they were very thorough. The officer was very clear in his expectations of us, and clear in his expectations of anybody else that might be around. And I call him a friend because he really took a neutral stance on everything we did. And like you say, he said basically, have your march, enjoy. Mm-hmm. If you need to stop, there'll be people along the way that have cups of water, like in a road race. So if you've got water there to cool off, you do your march, enjoy yourself, and on to the next march.
Yep. And then right across the street was the church, where it was a sanctuary. They provided a training about conflict resolution.
Yeah.
They trained. We had some kind of an exercise outside, mm-hmm. and then we went to our meeting area, staging area for the march.
Yep.
And then we got to meet a lot of people that I saw in New York City a year or two before, when we did the climate change march, which I understand was around 400,000 people.
Yep.
And Bernie, I didn't know he was there at the time.
At the climate change in New York, or
yep.
at the rally?
He was at the rally in New York City.
Okay.
I didn't know that at the time.
Well, back a couple of years earlier, I mean, a lot of folks, those of us who follow politics closely, knew about Bernie Sanders for 40 years now, and he's been completely consistent in everything he's ever talked about and stood for. But a lot of folks, he's from the little podunk state of Vermont, so he doesn't get much recognition until he racked up all these wins in the convention and in the primaries and the caucuses.
Yeah.
Tell us about the caucuses. Refresh us about the caucuses. You weren't in Philadelphia, but you know a lot about what went on in the Democratic primaries and caucuses.
Just to be fair, we kept Mark in the loop. We
most certainly.
Kept him,
it's the beauty of modern technology, texts and emails and photographs.
Back and forth.
We're sharing pictures.
Very much so.
Yeah.
The thing that stands out to me about the Democratic primaries, the difference between go in and vote primaries versus the caucuses, mm-hmm. is, and especially now with all of this talk of recount about the 3 states for the presidential, and now of course there's the rumblings, it's never going to happen, but the rumblings now about recounting the primaries. Mm-hmm. But what the Democratic National Committee started doing was, if you go back and look at the news reports in the early caucuses, they counted the totals very differently than they counted them in later caucuses. In the first few, they actually tallied the number of people, and as it got farther and farther along, to make it look like Bernie was getting less and less votes, they were just tallying the delegate counts for the states. Mm-hmm. So, what might have been tens of thousands of people voting for him in a given caucus. In the early ones, like Iowa, you got an actual vote total, whereas later on it was just the number of delegates. So it looked like he won a state with 1,500 votes or 2,000 votes, and that's really just the total of statewide delegates. And so, of course, when we hear now about that, Bernie got 13 million votes. He got 13 million votes in the states that do votes, but that doesn't count all of the states in which there were caucuses.
Right.
And of course, I believe he won every single state other than Iowa that had a caucus.
Yep.
So that 13 million number is actually artificially low through the manipulation of the statistics from the Democrats.
They denigrated the party denigrated the caucuses, particularly those the caucuses and even the primaries where people who were not affiliated with the Democratic Party got excited about this candidate, Bernie Sanders, and went out and voted and became members of the Democratic Party for a brief period of time. And of course, after he lost, I'm sure a lot of those folks were only going to vote in the election if Bernie Sanders were there. And so a lot of them just backed off and couldn't bring themselves to vote for Trump or Stein or Gary Johnson, any of them. Yep. And they just stayed home, or at least hopefully they went out to vote and voted in the down ticket races, because those are obviously very important also.
Or Gloria LaRiva, socialist candidate. She got her 43,000 votes in the nation.
There you go. So she's on the ballot?
No. She's got 43,000 votes nationwide. They have to do signatures every time.
Oh, okay.
To get
she's strictly write-in?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now,
Jill Stein got about 1% and Gary Johnson got about 3%. Did they get enough votes to automatically qualify for the 2-1-8-20?
No, not at all.
Either one of them?
Have to have 5%.
5% in order to automatically qualify. So now any minor, quote-unquote, minor party candidate that going forward in 2020, it's going to have to go through the whole process again and go state by state and get on the ballot state by state.
Yep.
Of course, Jill Stein got on the ballot, I think, in 47 states plus the District of Columbia, so it wasn't that hard. Gary Johnson was able to get on the ballot in all 50 states plus District of Columbia. So
I fathom that come the 2020 presidential election, we'll see at least those four parties have candidates. I think people are active enough now where you'll see at least four candidates on all 50 states, and maybe more. Wouldn't be surprised if by that point you see 5 or 6.
Well, I think that's a good thing, because this isn't people. These aren't votes that are being taken away from the Republican or the Democratic Party candidate. These are people that wouldn't go out and vote for either one of them because they just don't like them. That's why they're independent.
When you were in Philadelphia, though, speaking of Jill Stein and third parties, she was there.
Yep.
In Philadelphia, did you see Green support prior to the convention, or more as the week in Philadelphia went on? I mean, I think there was still some hope that somehow or another Bernie was going to get the nomination, but I think the massive Green Party support came afterwards.
Henry, I'll let you speak to that.
We didn't see anything. We did see right next door to City Hall, a couple of buildings next to the church where we got our training, was a convention, the Philadelphia Convention Center. And on Monday, we by accident walked by, and then we were going to attend some of the workshops they were offering, because the teachers union was offering, material for teachers to learn about climate change and elections and so on. And then next thing we heard is, oh, Bernie's coming at noon. And so, of course, we dropped everything and tried to get there. And it took forever to get to the room where he was holding his meeting. I mean, I think it took us like half an hour to get to. I mean, they
just
put
inside the
Bernie
building,
as far away as possible.
Just inside
convention.
the building. Once we were inside. Now, this was not at the Wells Fargo Convention Center. It was at the other convention center.
The Philadelphia Convention Center.
Philadelphia Convention Center, and like you say, we had to walk from the front door. It just seemed like forever. It probably was a mile indoors that we had to walk.
Yep.
And then the room was too small.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't just that, because we got there early, but those who got there later got cut off by security. So there were a lot of people behind the doors, and of course we tried to sneak in, and
got thrown out.
And then we did sneak in, but then
again.
got thrown out because we didn't have credentials.
Yeah.
So we spent about a minute and a half hearing Bernie talk, and then we got tossed out.
And that was the meeting he had where all of the delegates were there, where he talked about organizing behind Hillary to defeat the.
I don't think
Trump.
Hillary was mentioned at that point in time.
No.
No, I don't think so.
No, we were still talking. They were still talking about the upcoming vote on the convention floor to make sure that folks that were committed in each state to voting for Bernie Sanders.
When did he concede? I don't remember now.
Well, he never technically conceded, but it was 2 weeks prior that he, talked about needing to support Clinton against Trump. That was on July 11th was the thing in New Hampshire.
Okay, but then there was an endorsement. This was prior to the endorsement.
But I think the meeting in Philadelphia you're talking about, I think that's the one where a bunch of the delegates started booing him.
Yes, they did.
Because he was talking about having to rally behind the Democratic nominee to be able to defeat Trump.
And at that point, we were still angling, the Sanders campaign was still angling for as strong a position in the Democratic Party platform and changing Hillary Clinton and the party on a lot of important issues. One of them being the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Yeah. Clinton at one point, not too far back, had described the Trans-Pacific Partnership as being the gold standard of trade negotiations and trade deals. We got her to flip on that. We got her to not that she necessarily changed her mind on it, but we got her to say that she believed differently.
Except for the fact that the Democratic platform was pro-TPP.
Correct.
Which, had Hillary truly been against the TPP, that platform would have been against the TPP, because goodness knows, as we've seen and will continue to come out throughout the court, I mean, she controlled everything in the Democratic primary and picking of her as the nominee right on down. I mean, it was completely a power trip, and it failed mightily.
It didn't go over well with a lot of American voters.
And I think what will eventually, as there's more space and everyone stops flapping about Trump 24/7, is folks will look at her in the course of history and see how much damage she did to the Democratic movement overall, because no one's yet really talking about the fact that the Republicans rallying against her didn't just cost the Democrats the presidency. It didn't just cost the Democrats the continued not having control of the Senate and the House of Representatives. But you listen to Bernie saying how over the course of the last 8 years, Democrats had lost 900 seats in state races and local races across the country. I don't know what the complete tally is now, but that tally is even worse. Clinton running and the anti-Clinton movement to make sure she didn't win, not necessarily pro-Trump, it damaged the Democratic Party down the line in states and the local level in a way that no Democratic nominee has ever accomplished. And no one's talking about it yet, but when they start to realize on local levels how states have flipped, I mean, they're saying now how it's, the Republicans are near to the point of being able to just rewrite things because they're just shy of the 75%. And it's wild how her campaign, was really just imploded the Democratic Party right down the line.
Well, right now there is no Democratic leadership except for Bernie.
Throw something in about Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and then I'm gonna go from there talking about the previous head of the Democratic National Committee.
Go ahead.
Tell us about Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
Well, I just want to point out that right now there is no leadership. Once Debbie got asked to leave and then got a position within the Democratic Party, Bernie is really stepping in and kind of setting the direction. And I think the establishment Democrats have to listen. And I think, at least locally, I see it. I see them being open-minded to what Bernie is talking about.
That's a
because
good
it's
thing.
all about the platform and the issues and moving forward.
They
I
had
think
their
it's
chance.
it's more on the, if we look at the two extremes of common good and the self-interest, I think we have to be more or less in the middle. Okay, that's a good compromise. But unfortunately, with Trump now getting the election, then we're going to be more on the self-interest side, and I think we need to go away from self-interest and more on the common good side. Because right now, as I keep saying on the show, the self-interest people have run off the cliff, and it's just too extreme at this point.
I'm gonna without thoroughly bashing Debbie Wasserman Schultz, she leaves herself open for a lot of bashing, because if you look back after the 2004 election, another guy from Vermont named Howard Dean became chair of the Democratic National Committee. And he instituted basically what the Republicans had used to win the country over back in the 90s. He brought back in the 50-state strategy. And rather than the Democratic Party focusing on just those states that they had in their pocket and swing states, Howard Dean had them challenging the Republican Party, clearly and very forcefully challenging the Republican Party in every single state in America, Alaska of all places, Wyoming, Idaho. And amazingly enough, starting in 2006, the Democrats who did not have, they had a break even in the Senate. They had a pretty bad minority in the House of Representatives, and the Republicans had the presidency too with Bush. And Howard Dean managed to get the Democrats the majority in the House of Representatives and the Senate in 2006. 2008, likewise. And in 2008, his 50-state strategy got President Obama elected. President Obama unabashedly borrowed Howard Dean's 50-state strategy and challenged in every single state and won states that, who would have thunk that a Democrat would ever win North Carolina? Well, 2004, they won North Carolina. That was part of what Obama brought from Howard Dean and really, in fact, turned the country very blue. In 2010, the Democratic Party had 60 seats in the Senate. And 6 years later, they don't even have a majority anymore, because they've gone back to this we'll just fight for the states that that we think we can win, and never mind states like Alaska and Alabama and Mississippi and Georgia and North Carolina. We gave up on those. So that's
the reality on the Democratic Party is that I think that they've been slacking.
Yeah.
And that's being kind.
Lazy.
Okay?
Lazy, flat out lazy.
I'm being very kind when I say slacking, but I think that's why Bernie says we have to have a 50-state strategy.
Yep.
Basically, the Democrats got outworked and outspent and outmaneuvered, like in the gerrymandering, they got outmaneuvered.
So that's my 2 cents worth about the prospect of Howard Dean being successful in getting back the chair of the Democratic National Committee again. Although Keith Ellison, love to have him. He's a great young guy that's a very strong, very forceful guy, and I think he'll do a great job too. So either one of those two will do much better than Debbie Wasserman Schultz. And before Howard Dean, you had Terry McAuliffe as chair of the DNC, and all he managed to do was build a pretty building down on 4th Street in Washington, Southeast 4th Street. That was his big accomplishment.
When is the vote coming up on that?
2005, it was
for the chairman of the DNC.
They started they'll start the discussion in January, because I'm looking back to what they did back in after losing the election in 2004. I saw Howard Dean speak at the Northeast Regional at the Roosevelt Hotel in New York City in January. And I think they wrap it up by March, where they actually have a vote to determine who's going to actually be the chair. You'll have a bunch of people that are running for it, and they'll all put their 2 cents worth in, and then they wrap it up around March.
Next year?
March of next year. Then we'll know how we're going to go forward, and hopefully we'll have somebody that jumps right in.
So they're headless aggressive until then?
Yeah, pretty much.
Oh my God.
Pretty much. Except for the guy that we have talking on the news constantly now and being asked to come on the news constantly, and that's our Bernie Sanders.
Who's the only one talking about what's happening in North Dakota. He's the only one talking about issues. Everyone else is gaga over what's going on in Trump's cabinet and watching them play the coconut game with all of these people. And you think to yourself, where are the people to step up with him? And what it comes down to is it shows there's a vacuum in the leadership, and the only way it happens is everyone out on the local level really pushing forward, because I have no belief that the Democrats are going to find any sort of leadership that's going to work down on this level. I mean, you have this entire history of people from the top down now who are like, sure, we'll take money from the Democrats to support Hillary in the primary. So what good does it do if you find some leadership at the top when you still have this corrupt and, you know, essentially Republican-based, we're going to take the money down on the local level? It all needs to be cleared out. All of it needs to be just burned to the ground.
Yeah. The party, as people have been saying for quite some time, is heading in the direction of being a corporate party. Yeah, the Whigs. Yeah, they're the weak alternative to the Republican Party, and even so far as to say that it's a duopoly. Both parties are completely corporate. And with that, we're going to bid you a fond adieu. And
anybody locally want to found a Democratic Socialist Party?
That's one of the options. One of the options we have is to work within the Democratic Party, and the other is to step outside the party, and start a new party. It's been Progressive Soup. David Stevenson, Henry Pietras, Mark Morash, co-host, and thank you for joining us.